I am NetMoverSitan. Welcome to the Objects Abnormality section. This consists of objects that have power within them, or have a life of their own. Either way, they're dangerous. There have been mentions of artifacts found in the ruins or crude inventions, which might be early prototypes found in the backstreets. But let's start with something more cuddly. The happy teddy bear. This might look like a harmless old stuffed toy that's in need of repair. But don't let that fool you. It's something that would appear if Toy Story was turned into a horror movie series. The previous owner loved that bear. It looked dejected because it had been abandoned. Those that work on it more than once. Let us just say that toy will come to life. Hold on to them real tight and snap their neck. All because it didn't want to be separated from its owner. Excessive? That logic is lost on some humans, never mind toys. I mean, just look at some mass political rallies. That whips a crowd up into mass hysteria, regardless of the morality of who they're cheering for. Next, we have an education tool of a sadistic professor. Phoresia. This appears to be an ordinary antique music box with a dancing ballerina. Its sad melody heals the mind of the one who plays it, at first. Where it's as if they believe that everything is fine, and they start singing "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life" from Monty Python's Life of Brian. Makes me want to vomit. But if they listen to it too long, it has the exact opposite effects, until they start panicking as they lose their minds. Kind of like me upon listening to even a few seconds of that song written by Eric Idle. Or anything by ABBA for that matter. There is a sentence carved on it by someone. Remember this melody? The professor played this song when the students were sleepy. Happy birthday. Yeah. It's clear that whoever this applied to, they clearly didn't like the students sleeping. Next we have bloodbath. Yeah, that's what it's called. This bath filled with blood, depression and despair is kept in balance and never overflows. Likely to have been done by one who had a strong willpower to cut the wrist of another, to chop it as if it were a chunk of meat, to yearn for death, as two partners in crime did, who shared a bottle of wine with each other when they succeeded, although the male slit his partner in crime's wrist when the last bottle of wine remained. too little fortitude results in the employee falling into the bath and one of their hands remaining on the surface, resulting in an increase in output as a consequence. This reminds me of a story that I'll be covering in the history of certain characters later on in this series. Well, it has a beginning, doesn't it? Next, we have something that wasn't possessed by a psychotic murderer via voodoo. It's Alruine, a doll that yearned to be human, that could teleport and cover those that stayed too close for too long in pink, glowing, flowery plants. The soulful eyes were a distinctive feature. This doll was abandoned in a dark forest, and crows stole her glittering eyes. This caused her to slowly fade away, although she was able to see things without eyes. This didn't restore her hope. This doll attacks the mind, breaches when there's anything but a normal result, and when she breaches, she teleports between rooms and corridors, and will attack all in the same place with much white damage. And if they remain near her for too long, and if they panic, they'll be killed by pink petals. Next we have something with a Japanese flavor, the Crumbling Armor. This might look like an antique set of samurai armor, but those that do repression work steadily become faster in both movement and attack speed, at the cost of their physical and mental health. They can also not do attachment works ever again, as that would cause the armor to kill that agent. There's a saying associated with this armor: life is given to those who do not fear death. The armor belonged to a general who joined a war, likely around Japan's feudal era. It was a family heirloom that passed over many generations. This general wore it to protect himself. I mean, he'd have to be a remarkably foolish or idiotic general to not wear some form of protection on the battlefield. Not that it helped him, as an arrow flew into a gap, killing him, but leaving the armor intact. Well, despite being ridiculously unlucky, at least he died a warrior. Then a commander of a battalion wore it, preferring to be steel-clad when he went into battle. He fell off his horse and died from a strong blow to the head, cracking his skull. And still the armor was undamaged. Others wore it, and the pattern repeated, until a warrior who survived, largely because he didn't wear it in battle, he died of old age after fighting in dozens of wars without a single injury. In that case, not a very good warrior. The armor's arm plate was damaged, regardless of any exterior impacts. His family later donated it to a museum. Well, it saved an American archaeologist with a whip having to take it and do so. Yeah. That's one. Yeah, going on a suicide mission, you can tell who's terrible at it if they come back alive. The armor hates cowards and will do all it can to kill them. Although those that have no fear of death, a rarity in the Lobotomy Corporation, they're more likely to survive. It was rejected when a personnel manager suggested that an interviewee wear it and walk for 10 minutes. Presumably the ones that survived would have gotten the job, and those that didn't would die. I could understand why, because it would mean there'd be no one to recruit. There's a reason why the Lobotomy Corporation's employment standards are so low. It's to make up for the attrition. Next, we have something that isn't covered by Bonnie Tyler, Motley Crue, Elton John, or Crush 40. It's the heart of Aspiration. A heart that beats on its own, and not from something by Edgar Allan Poe. When in the possession of an agent, they become more physically durable and can attack faster. Although this doesn't come without a price. The price being that agents would need to attack someone and not return the heart for at least 30 seconds, or they'll lose their mind and panic in a way that makes them violent. In that case, it's best to keep wearing it until the day's over, because at least that way there won't be a grip-off meltdown, and it will provide a slight advantage in case a red damage dealing abnormalities works on, or if there's a battle. Actually, it's not a matter of if in the Lobotomy Corporation, but when. Certainly once you get past the early stages. Yeah. Next we have Notes from a Crazed Researcher. It's full of incomprehensible cursive writing. The researcher that this once belonged to went mad while writing it. It's full of various experiments conducted. At least some of them were unethical. It also included confessions of guilt, although it became more crazy and full of broken sentences about his research later on. It ends with Born Again. Those that borrow it will gain increased success rates and work speed. But if they return it within 30 seconds, or without doing any works, they will blow up. If they receive too much physical or mental damage, this will also make them explode in an explosion that physically damages anyone nearby. Yeah, this is one that's more trouble than it's worth, isn't it? 19th century conspiracy theory, anyone? A 19th century conspiracy theory used to justify persecution and genocide, decades after it was written. Next, it's a home fixture that we can do without. It's the Mirror of Adjustment. It only shows people and changes them. Possibilities regarding its origins include a window to a parallel universe, magical powers, but it's not confirmed in either case. Now there's an object for the terminally vain, a magic mirror. I believe one of Snow White's extended family had something like this, although this is completely different. The agent that looks at this will have their attributes moved around randomly. So when before an agent would have more attachments, they'd find that some of that has been moved to justice. Although if they look at it too many times, they become weaker. It's said that they turn into different people. They even lose their humanity, turning into a walking corpse. Satisfaction is only temporary. Sounds like pay-to-win mechanics in games that have been deliberately designed to encourage paying more real money just to make it playable. Except this is much worse, as it can cost the user of it their souls. This sounds like the perfect place to be, considering what's in the Lobotomy Corporation. It's the shelter from the 27th of March. This shelter protects against everything outside, including light, and still remembers the 27th of March. Why is this? Is it because that's when the war that caused the devastation around where the city in what I presume to be North Korea took place, or did something happen during that war on that day? Well, regardless of what it is, those that are within this shelter are immune to all damage, except from what I'll be covering next, and regenerate both physical and mental damage. They also become undetectable to anything that was hunting them. Made by P Company, and marketed as the safest place on Earth, which had a large amount of long-lasting supplies, which meant that long-term residency within this was what they had in mind when they made it. All while protected from the screaming and bloodshed. Yeah, it's likely that this war is what it remembered. Unfortunately, it makes those outside feel hopeless as, well, they're not in the shelter. So yes, it is the safest place on Earth, partly because everything outside is about as safe as juggling chainsaws on ice, above freezing water just as it's rapidly melting. I would not want to be in that position, and I don't think any of you would want that either. Well, if you do, I advise you to get some help. I can talk. Oh yes, and remember what I said about the shelter being effective at shielding against all damage except from this next abnormality? Well, it's another house fixture. It's the portrait of another world. No, you're not going to hear the voice of Charles Martinet when you're near this, nor are you likely to meet a certain Italian-American stereotype. It's not that kind of portrait. The employee that sees this will have themselves etched onto the canvas. The portrait captures a moment, because as time passes, it's what we all lose, either due to failing physical or mental health. They see their healthy self, and they are protected at the expense of another. where any damage caused to the employee will be given to another employee somewhere in the facility, which is increased slightly. Specifically, the damage caused to that employee. And, well, if the damage exceeds the maximum HP of the employee on the canvas, it doesn't apply it. When an employee dies because of this effect, another will be chosen to take their place. Although, if for some reason the employee gets bored of seeing their own portrait and grows complacent, then that employee will die if another views that portrait instead. Also, if that employee is killed by something like an execution bullet or some non-standard damage, then the portrait will be blank. Sounds like voodoo crossed with the game Layers of Fear. Perhaps that's why, or rather how, this abnormality was created. You might want to check that game out if you want to know the details. It gets disturbing. I'm not joking, it does. This next one might look like some anti-Superman countermeasure, but something completely different. The luminous bracelet. This was found in the outskirts. A bracelet that emits a soft blue-green light that regenerates the wearer's physical injuries. Although it does have its flaws. If the wearer returns it before they're fully healed, or if they wear it too long, they die of a rapidly developing cancer straight out of the movie Wishmaster. The latter being an act of greed, which the bracelet doesn't forgive, as it should only be used when needed. Yeah, the cancer due to cells multiplying faster than the body can keep up. Either that or a random mutation caused by the rapid regeneration. Either way, like many things in the Lobotomy Corporation that have a usefulness, it shouldn't be used lightly. Those that do usually end up dead. Yeah, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Now for something that in our world would be considered controversial. But in that world, I doubt it. It's behavior adjustment. An electronic device that forces the wearer to become righteous, regardless of their morality before wearing it. A mind control device that cures evil people? Unfortunately, while justice increases, it also reduces prudence as it affects the mind. The wearer is unable to think on their own, and if returned before 31 seconds have passed, they'll kill themselves as they forget how to exist. Well, let's face it, if this was a viable cure for evil, it wouldn't be in the facility in the first place, would it? Right, on to the next one. Finally, we have an abnormality that doesn't directly affect the agents that use it. Old belief and promise. A marble hanging in the containment unit. Energy is consumed when it's used, although there's a chance that the weapon offered to it will have its attack power increased. But it's not a guarantee. Countless promises and beliefs have been made. However, hollowness and betrayal can sometimes return, as the weapon has a chance of being destroyed. And even when improved, the weapon can revert to normal. Well, it will return to normal on the next day. Sometimes if you try without wanting in return, you might get an unexpected reward. Then again, the betrayed might slowly sink into the depths. Well, the late Lemmy Kilmeister, although he sung about liking it that way, he also sung about gambling being for fools. Much like superstition. Well, there are always those willing to risk their weapon. Quite a mix of objects, wasn't there? Well, it'll get more mechanical in the next one. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!